The phone lay on the desk, a black mirror reflecting nothing. It was an ordinary object, yet in the stillness of the room, it seemed to hold a certain weight, a silent sentinel waiting for the inevitable call. The room was dark, the only light coming from the faint glow of the phone screen, casting eerie shadows on the walls. Silence. It was the quietest hour in the dispatch room, the lull before dawn when even the city slept. The streets outside were deserted, the usual hustle and bustle replaced by an almost eerie calm. Inside, the dispatch room was equally still, the hum of electronics, the only sound breaking the silence. The operators, few and far between, sat at their desks, eyes heavy with fatigue, waiting for the next call to break the monotony. Then a sharp, insistent ring shattered the stillness. The sound was jarring, a sudden intrusion into the quiet, and it seemed to echo in the empty room. The phone's ring was a call to action, a reminder that even in the dead of night emergencies could happen and someone, somewhere, needed help. The rookie operator, barely out of high school, jumped, then reached for the call, his fingers lingering on the button for a heartbeat too long. He was new to the job, still getting used to the sudden bursts of activity that punctuated the long stretches of quiet. His heart raced as he picked up the receiver, the weight of responsibility heavy on his shoulders. He drew a breath, the digital crackle in his ear a familiar comfort, and spoke, his voice a touch too high. 911. What's your emergency? The words were routine, drilled into him during training, but each call was different, each voice on the other end a new story, a new crisis. He braced himself for whatever was to come, knowing that in this job every second counted. A voice, thin and reedy like wind chimes in a storm, answered him.
"Help me," it whispered, the words barely audible. "They're here."
The operator's brow furrowed.
"Sir, can you tell me your location?"
The whispering ceased. Silence, except for a faint rhythmic tapping in the background, like fingernails on an oak door.
"Sir?"
The operator repeated, his voice tighter now. The tapping intensified, morphing into a frantic scratching. Then a child's giggle, high and chilling, cut through the line. The operator jerked back, a shiver crawling up his spine.
"Sir, I need you to tell me where you are."
The giggle came again, closer now, playful, menacing. Then a woman's voice, sharp with terror.
"He won't let me go. He's got my son."
"Ma'am, who has your son?"
The operator pressed, his voice urgent.
"The swing set," the woman sobbed, her voice breaking. "He's on the swing set, but there's no one there."
The operator stared at the street map flashing on his screen. No reported incidents near any local parks. The room was dimly lit, the only light coming from the computer screen that cast eerie shadows on the walls. He had been monitoring the area for hours, his eyes scanning for any signs of trouble. The silence in the office was almost deafening, broken only by the occasional hum of the computer. He leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples, trying to shake off the fatigue that was beginning to set in.
"Ma'am, are you at the park on Elm Street?" His voice was steady, but there was an underlying tension that he couldn't quite hide. The park on Elm Street was notorious for strange occurrences, and his mind raced with possibilities. He could almost picture the empty playground, the swings swaying gently in the night breeze, the eerie lighting casting long shadows that seemed to move on their own. He waited for her response, his heart pounding in his chest.
He asked, his voice calm, measured. A piercing shriek ripped through the phone, followed by a burst of static. The sound was so sudden and jarring that he almost dropped the phone. His eyes widened in shock, and he could feel the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. The scream was unlike anything he had ever heard before, filled with a raw, primal terror that sent chills down his spine. He gripped the phone tighter, trying to steady his shaking hand. When the line cleared, all he could hear was the woman's ragged breathing, punctuated by choked sobs. The silence that followed was almost as terrifying as the scream. He could hear her struggling to catch her breath, each sob a painful reminder of the fear she was experiencing. He wanted to say something, to offer some kind of comfort, but the words wouldn't come. He felt a sense of helplessness wash over him, knowing that there was little he could do from his end of the line.
"He's gone," she whispered, her voice hollow. "My son, he's gone." The words hit him like a punch to the gut. He could hear the despair in her voice, the overwhelming sense of loss that seemed to seep through the phone. He closed his eyes for a moment, trying to imagine what she must be going through. The thought of a child disappearing in the dead of night was every parent's worst nightmare, and he felt a deep sense of sorrow for the woman on the other end of the line.
The operator's hand trembled as he reached for the button to connect her to the police. He knew that time was of the essence, and every second counted. His mind raced with thoughts of what could have happened to the boy, and he felt a sense of urgency that he had never felt before. As he pressed the button, he silently prayed that they would find the child in time. The weight of the situation bore down on him, and he took a deep breath, steeling himself for what was to come. The next call came just as the first rays of dawn touched the city.
I think someone's in my house.
A man, his voice thick with sleep and confusion.
Can you describe the intruder, sir?
The operator asked, already dispatching a patrol car.
I don't know, I just woke up and my front door is wide open. Sir, are you sure you didn't leave it open by mistake? The operator questioned, trying to calm the man down.
No, the man hissed, his voice tight with fear. And something's not right. It's cold, too cold. The operator listened as the man's breathing grew quicker, shallower.
Sir, stay on the line, he commanded. The police are on their way.
Then a soft whisper, barely audible, came through the phone. He shouldn't be here. The man gasped, a strangled cry escaping his lips. Sir, what's happening? Sir! The operator yelled, his heart pounding in his chest. Silence met his words, a heavy, pregnant silence broken only by the faint echo of static. He listened intently, his own breath catching in his throat. Then, a soft click, followed by the distinct sound of a door closing. The operator sat back, his skin crawling with goosebumps. The man's house was empty, the police confirming they'd found no signs of forced entry. The phone slipped from the operator's grasp, clattering onto the desk. He stared at the blinking light on the console, each pulse a chilling reminder of the unseen horrors lurking just beyond the veil of normalcy. He tried to dismiss the calls as pranks, as figments of an overactive imagination. But the fear that lingered in the air, the cold dread that had seeped into his bones, told a different story. As he reached for another cup of coffee, his hand shaking slightly, he noticed something out of the corner of his eye. He turned slowly, his breath catching in his throat, his eyes darting around the dimly lit room. The shadows seemed to dance on the walls, playing tricks on his mind. He could feel the weight of the silence pressing down on him, making it hard to think clearly. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of the curtains sent a jolt of fear through his body. His heart hammering against his ribs, he tried to steady his breathing. There, standing in the doorway, a figure shrouded in shadows, its presence almost palpable. The figure seemed to absorb the light around it, creating an aura of darkness that was both terrifying and mesmerizing. Its features obscured by the dim light, he could barely make out the contours of its face. He opened his mouth to speak, to demand answers, but the words caught in his throat. His voice, usually so strong and confident, was now reduced to a mere whisper, lost in the oppressive silence of the room. The figure took a step closer, its movement slow and deliberate, as if savoring the fear it was instilling. He could feel the temperature drop, a chill colder than any winter wind washing over him. It was as if the very essence of the figure was draining the warmth from the room, leaving only an icy void in its wake. The phone on the desk rang, the shrill sound echoing through the silent room. It was an old-fashioned phone, the kind you only see in movies or antique shops. The ringing seemed to go on forever, each ring a reminder of the growing tension and fear that gripped him. He didn't dare move, didn't dare breathe. The figure glided towards him, its form shifting, wavering in the half-light. It was as if the shadows themselves were alive, moving and twisting in ways that defied logic and reason. He could feel his heart pounding in his chest, each beat a painful reminder of his own vulnerability. The figure continued to move closer, its presence growing more oppressive with each passing second. He could feel the air grow thick, making it hard to breathe. The room seemed to close in around him, the walls pressing in, trapping him in this nightmare, its form shifting, wavering in the half-light. And then the line went dead. The sudden silence was deafening, a stark contrast to the ringing that had filled the room just moments before. He stood there, frozen in place, his mind racing with questions and fears. What was this figure? Why was it here? And most importantly, what did it want from him? The answers eluded him, lost in the darkness that now surrounded him.